are a lot of bad things that can happen to a person in their lifetime, but one of the scariest things is when someone seemingly disappears off the face of the planet. And when it happens to a celebrity, it's even more mysterious. Welcome back, guys. I'm your host Kennedy, and today we are back again with part 2 of the top 10 missing celebrities we're still trying to find. Let's get into it. Starting us off at number 10 is Connie Converse. Born Elizabeth Converse and raised in the Baptist Church, in the early 1950s, Elizabeth moved to New York, started calling herself Connie, and began writing songs and performing them for her friends, accompanying herself on the guitar. Didn't take long before Connie began assimilating into her new lifestyle, smoking and drinking for the first time in her life. Now, to be clear, she had no recorded issues, but her parents, still deeply religious, saw this as an act of defiance and essentially rejected her new life entirely and refused to support Connie's music career. Sadly, her parents were not alone in this rejection. Besides one brief TV appearance on the morning show, Connie's singer-songwriter approach to music was not widely popular, nor did she ever really receive much positive recognition. It seems her lyrical, melancholy ballads got lost in the brass, and by 1961, convinced she was a failure with no real talent, Connie quit music altogether. Then in 1974, just after her 50th birthday, Connie wrote letters to her friends and family, essentially stating that she wished to make a new life for herself, and instead of going to the lake for a family gathering where she had been expected, Connie drove away and was never seen or heard from again. There are some theories that she could have taken her own life, but no body was ever found. Although now, some 49 years later, it is likely she could be gone at this point. However, one can only hope she was alive to see when her music became a cult classic in 2009 after being released by Gene Deitch's record label. Next up at number 9 is Forrest Schab, a Vancouver rapper who came into the spotlight back in 2009 after releasing his hit club track Passenger. Forrest began touring Canada as the opener for Akon after signing a deal with CP Records. Now, Forrest performed under the stage name DY, which stood for Die Young, and aside from being an extremely ominous name for someone who disappeared at the young age of 26, was, as far as anyone else could see, doing really well for himself. So I guess that's what kind of makes him especially mysterious. Unlike some of the others on this list, his life and career were actually on a really good trajectory. He was even preparing to drop his second single at the time of his disappearance. But after announcing his upcoming full-length album in 2010, Forrest apparently shot the music video for his second single, and allegedly at that time his contract with CP Records ended. Then in August of 2010, Forrest flew from Toronto to Mexico. A few weeks later, he wished his friend a happy birthday over social media, but sadly that was the last anyone heard from him. By November 18th, he was reported missing in Mexico, and Canadian police began investigating his whereabouts. In December, his family released grave worry about his disappearance, and although some have speculated his disappearance is related to organized crime affiliations or potentially even that he took his own life due to the loss of his contract, it all remains a complete speculation. 12 years have passed and he still remains a missing person with no viable leads about where he could be. Next up at number 8, Oscar Zeta Acosta, a writer, attorney, and activist for the Chicano movement of the United States in the 40s and 50s. Acosta was well known as being a big-time consumer of pills, booze, and hallucinogens in extreme quantities. Not only that, he was a close friend with writer Hunter S. Thompson, who wrote about and immortalized Acosta as the drug-hazed Dr. Gonzo in his novel Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. But sadly, although the book brought Thompson great fame, it also brought a great deal of tension to their relationship that never fully mended while Acosta was in the limelight. Acosta was a well-known public figure with a reputation for disruption, so it perplexed everyone when in May of 1974 he visited his family home in Mexico and simply vanished out of thin air. Thompson spent years searching for his friend with no success, and along with Acosta's son, feared that perhaps his friend had been killed by a drug hit or assassination. However, as no information has ever surfaced, his whereabouts remain a giant mystery to this day. Next up at number 7 is Dan Cooper. Okay, so this man was less of a celebrity before his disappearance, but he became one due to it happening. Back in 1971, a man who went by the alias Dan Cooper hijacked a commercial plane, and no one has ever been able to find him since. According to those involved, shortly after takeoff, he handed a note to a flight attendant claiming to have a bomb in his briefcase. He demanded 4 parachutes and $200,000 in $20 bills, which is about the equivalent of like $1.2 million nowadays. Otherwise, he was going to kill everyone on the plane. After the flight landed in Seattle, Cooper released the 36 passengers once authorities provided him with the money and parachutes. But he kept both pilots, one flight engineer, and flight attendants as hostages on the plane. From there, he forced them to fly to Mexico City, but somewhere over Nevada, Cooper jumped off the plane with the stolen cash. The FBI launched a massive search that is still considered one of the longest and most exhaustive investigations in FBI history. But he has yet to be found, and although he isn't on the top 10 wanted list anymore, he is still considered a missing and wanted person. Coming in at number 6, Rico Harris. In 2000, Rico Harris was a player for the Harlem Globetrotters, but despite his clear talent and incredible potential, Rico suffered from alcoholism and slowly but surely began to lose all his athletic opportunities. After losing his position as a professional player, Rico spent the next few years battling his addiction until finally a 2007 overdose led him to a rehabilitation center. After completing the program, Rico wound up working as a security guard in LA, met a woman, and was beginning to really find his stride. The couple were long distance at first, but by 2014, 2 years after they met, things were going really well, so Harris decided to make the move to Washington from California and set up a job interview in his new city. Before the big move, he went to say goodbye to his family in Alabama to get some closure, specifically from his mother, according to his girlfriend at the time. But after leaving his mother's house in Alabama, records show that he drove north, stopping in Lottie, about 40 miles south of Sacramento, to get gas before calling his girlfriend and leaving a message saying that he was going up the mountains to rest since he had not slept much since leaving Seattle. Then, mysteriously, at 11:15 p.m., he turned off his phone, and not a single soul has heard from him or seen him since that day. His car was found abandoned outside Sacramento, and an investigation into his disappearance uncovered a backpack and a phone on the roadside. At the same time, there had been a few reports of a tall man walking along Route 16, and human footprints were found in the sand. But never any sign of Harris himself. Coming in at number 5 is Joe Pichler. During the late 90s and early 2000s, Joe was a teen actor who received some success appearing in small and supporting roles in several movies and TV shows over the years, like Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, Varsity Blues, and was Brennan Newton in the Beethoven franchise. After his small bit of LA success, his family insisted he move back to Washington so that he could graduate high school there. Joe agreed and graduated high school in Washington in 2005, and according to friends and family, he planned to return to LA in 2006 after his braces were removed to continue pursuing his acting career. But strangely, on January 5th, 2006, after speaking with a friend at about 4 a.m., he was never seen or heard from again. On January 9th, his car was found abandoned and his apartment was left untouched, unlocked, and with all the lights on. And apart from one note that vaguely spoke to a depressed state, there was nothing pointing towards Joe taking his own life. In fact, the friend he'd spoken with on January 5th mentioned he seemed in really good spirits. Tragically, the case has never been solved, and no remains have ever been found, and so 17 years later, Joe remains a missing person, and his whereabouts remain just as big a mystery today as they were then. Coming in at number 4 is Patrick McDermott. Although Patrick worked as a fairly successful cinematographer star on a handful of short films in the 2000s, his main claim to fame came from his personal life. Famously, Patrick was the on-again, off-again partner of pop star Olivia Newton-John for 9 years between 1996 to 2005. And at the time of his disappearance in 2005, Patrick was on board a Mexico-bound fishing boat, which was apparently somewhat of a frequent activity for him. But this time, he never returned. He boarded all alone, and despite some of his personal belongings, including his car keys, passport, and wallet, which were all found on the boat, Patrick was never seen again. What's especially strange is that according to the Coast Guard, there was no sign of accident, criminal activity, or an attempt to take his own life while on board. The most accepted theory of his whereabouts, after a PI was hired to look into the case for Dateline, is that Patrick faked his own death to avoid substantial debts and allow his son to cash in on his life insurance policy. There are even some conspiracies that he remains hiding out in Mexico to this day with a new girlfriend, but officially there is no concrete evidence that this is true. In fact, one of the photos that was used in an Australian tabloid claiming to be Patrick turned out to be a random guy from Manitoba, Canada, with his wife, leaving us no closer to the truth behind this strange disappearance. Next up at number 3 is Hale Boggs. In 1972, Hale Boggs was one of the most famous politicians in America. A Democrat from New Orleans, Boggs became well known by the public for not only being the House Majority Leader during the Nixon years, but also, or even more so, for his frequent, colorful outbursts while on the job. He famously verbally attacked FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, as well as the FBI as a whole in Congress, became a member who President Nixon refused to take counsel from, and became notorious after outwardly doubting the lone gunman theory of the JFK shooting. Now, Hale was unfortunately someone who suffered from addiction, and it became kind of the belief that most of what he was saying had more to do with his issue with drugs and alcohol than anything else. So imagine the nation's shock when on October 16th of 1972, Boggs, who had been in Alaska helping a fellow congressman's re-election bid, disappeared and was never seen or heard from again. All that was known was that the pair got into an aircraft heading towards the small town of Juneau, Alaska. But despite there being a law that the aircraft needed to be equipped with an emergency locator transmitter, this aircraft was mysteriously not equipped with one. Naturally, the US government instigated a massive search, launching 90 planes to search the area, but no trace of the missing aircraft or its occupants were ever recovered. There are some conspiracies surrounding his death, particularly due to his issues with the FBI and work investigating the JFK case, and some believe he was assassinated. But the truth is that no one really knows what happened to him or where he could have gone. Coming in our number 2 spot is Sean Flynn. Growing up, both Sean's dad and mom were successful actors, and so most of his life Sean assumed he would follow in their footsteps. So after attending Duke University in 1960, Sean embarked on his career and tried to recreate their success. However, after making 10 movies, 8 of which completely bombed, Sean decided that acting was not what he wanted out of life, and in the mid-1960s retired from being in front of the camera and decided to get behind one instead. Sean found his calling as a photojournalist and ended up flying out to Vietnam during the war, working as a freelancer first for a French magazine, Paris Match, followed by Time Life, and finally working for United Press International. During his time as a photojournalist, Sean made quite the name for himself, capturing some harrowing moments of the country's time at war. But unfortunately, it would also lead to his disappearance. In April of 1970, Sean, along with some other journalists, made his way over to Phnom Penh to attend a government-sponsored conference. However, unlike the others, Sean and one other member decided to ride their motorcycles instead of taking the limousine provided. All that is known is that Sean stopped at a location where the Viet Cong was known to be using and he was never seen again. While there are many theories that he was taken out by the Khmer Rouge, his remains have never been found, and despite extensive searches to find him, no one has been able to uncover what really happened to Sean while visiting the dangerous checkpoint. And last up in our number 1 spot, Zelim Bakeav. Starting in 2013, Zelim began quickly rising to fame after releasing several singles. While climbing the ladder, the Russian pop star applied to be a part of the 10th season of the Russian version of the popular reality show Star Academy. Zelim was accepted and slated to begin in 2017, but tragically he never made it. On August 6, 2017, Zelim was traveling to a nearby town to attend his sister's wedding before making his way back to Moscow to begin shooting. But allegedly, on August 8th, he was arrested by Chechen authorities exactly the same day his phone became inexplicably deactivated. By August 18th, no one had heard from him, and his mother, extremely worried about his whereabouts, filed a complaint with her local police about her son's disappearance. Now, the scary part about all of this is that there's a lot of speculation that he was kidnapped and arrested for being gay. Something that is plausible considering the anti-LGBTQ campaign that was going on at the time of his disappearance. And no matter how hard his mom tried, the government refused to open a criminal investigation into his disappearance, but was simply told he would reappear soon. Then in September of 2017, an eerie YouTube video was posted by someone claiming to be Zelim, saying that he lives in Germany now, but his family doesn't believe it's him. While no one knows exactly what happened to the poor young man, there are a lot of theories that he was either killed or that he remains trapped somewhere by the government. Well, there you have it. I hope you liked this video. If you did, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you next time.